He walked the length of Bogoy-Avlinsky Street. At last the road began to go downhill, his feet slipped in the mud, and suddenly there lay open before him a wide, misty, as it were empty expanse, the river. The houses were replaced by hovels, the street was lost in a multitude of irregular little alleys. Nikolai Vsyevolodovitch was a long while making his way between the fences, keeping close to the river bank, but finding his way confidently, and scarcely giving it a thought indeed. He was absorbed in something quite different, and looked round with surprise when suddenly, waking up from a profound reverie, he found himself almost in the middle of one long, wet, floating bridge. There was not a soul to be seen, so that it seemed strange to him when suddenly, almost at his elbow, he heard a deferentially familiar, but rather pleasant, voice, with a suave intonation, such as is affected by our over-refined tradespeople or befrizzled young shop assistants. "Will you kindly allow me, sir, to share your umbrella?" There actually was a figure that crept under his umbrella, or tried to appear to do so. The tramp was walking beside him, almost feeling his elbow, as the soldiers say. Slackening his pace, Nikolai Vsyevolodovitch bent down to look more closely, as far as he could, in the darkness. It was a short man, and seemed like an artisan who had been drinking. He was shabbily and scantily dressed, a cloth cap, soaked by the rain and with the brim half torn off, perched on his shaggy, curly head. He looked a thin, vigorous, swarthy man with dark hair. His eyes were large and must have been black, with a hard glitter and a yellow tinge in them, like a gypsy's, that could be divined even in the darkness. He was about 40, and was not drunk. "Do you know me?" asked Nikolai Vsyevolodovitch. "Mr. Stavrogin, Nikolai Vsyevolodovitch. You were pointed out to me at the station, when the train stopped last Sunday, though I had heard enough of you beforehand." "From Fyodor Stepanovitch? Are you Fedka the convict?" "I was christened Fyodor Fyodorovitch. My mother is living to this day in these parts. She's an old woman, and grows more and more bent every day. She prays to God for me, day and night, so that she doesn't waste her old age lying on the stove." "You escaped from prison?" "I've had a change of luck. I gave up books and bells and church going because I'd a life sentence, so that I had a very long time to finish my term." "What are you doing here?" "Well, I do what I can. My uncle, too, died last week in prison here. He was there for false coin, so I threw 24 stones at the dogs by way of memorial. That's all I've been doing so far. Moreover, Pyotr Stepanovitch gives me hopes of a passport, and a merchant's one, too, to go all over Russia, so I'm waiting on his kindness. Because, says he, my papa lost you at cards at the English club, and I, says he, find that inhumanity unjust. You might have the kindness to give me 3 rubles, sir, for a glass to warm myself." "So you've been spying on me. I don't like that. By whose orders?" "As to orders, it's nothing of the sort, it's simply that I knew of your benevolence, which is known to all the world. All we get, as you know, is an armful of hay, or a prod with a fork. Last Friday I filled myself as full of pie as Martin did of soap. Since then I didn't eat one day, and the day after I fasted, and on the third I'd nothing again. I've had my fill of water from the river. I'm breeding fish in my belly. So won't your honor give me something? I've a sweetheart expecting me not far from here, but I daren't show myself to her without money." "What did Pyotr Stepanovitch promise you from me?" "He didn't exactly promise anything, but only said that I might be of use to your honor if my luck turns out good, but how exactly he didn't explain, for Pyotr Stepanovitch wants to see if I have the patience of a Cossack, and feels no sort of confidence in me." "Why?" "Pyotr Stepanovitch is an astronomer, and has learnt all God's planets, but even he may be criticized. I stand before you, sir, as before God, because I have heard so much about you. Fyodor Stepanovich is one thing, but you, sir, maybe, are something else. When he said of a man he's a scoundrel, he knows nothing more about him except that he's a scoundrel. Or if he said he's a fool, then that man has no calling with him except that of fool. But I may be a fool Tuesday and Wednesday, and on Thursday wiser than he. Here now he knows about me that I'm awfully sick to get a passport, for there's no getting on in Russia without papers, so he thinks that he's snared my soul. I tell you, sir, life's a very easy business for Fyodor Stepanovich, for he fancies a man to be this and that, and goes on as though he really was. And, what's more, he's beastly stingy. It's his notion that, apart from him, I daren't trouble you, but I stand before you, sir, as before God. This is the 4th night I've been waiting for your honor on this bridge, to show that I can find my own way on the quiet, without him. I'd better bow to a boot, thinks I, than to a peasant's shoe. And who told you that I was going to cross the bridge at night? Well, that, alone, came out by chance, most through Captain Lebyadkin's foolishness, because he can't keep anything to himself. So that 3 rubles from your honor would pay me for the weary time I've had these 3 days and nights. And the clothes I've had soaked, I feel that too much to speak of it. I'm going to the left, you'll go to the right. Here's the end of the bridge. Listen, Fyodor, I like people to understand what I say, once for all. I won't give you a farthing. Don't meet me in future on the bridge or anywhere. I've no need of you, and never shall have, and if you don't obey, I'll tie you and take you to the police. March. Aha! Fling me something for my company, anyhow. I've cheered you on your way. Be off. But do you know the way here? There are all sorts of turnings. I could guide you, for this town is for all the world as though the devil carried it in his basket and dropped it in bits here and there. I'll tie you up, said Nikolai Syavolodovich, turning upon him menacingly. Perhaps you'll change your mind, sir, it's easy to ill-treat the helpless. Well, I see you can rely on yourself. I rely upon you, sir, and not very much on myself. I've no need of you at all. I've told you so already. But I have need, that's how it is. I shall wait for you on the way back. There's nothing for it. I give you my word of honor, if I meet you I'll tie you up. Well, I'll get a belt ready for you to tie me with. A lucky journey to you, sir. You kept the helpless snug under your umbrella. For that alone I'll be grateful to you to my dying day. He fell behind. Nikolai Syavolodovich walked on to his destination, feeling disturbed. This man who had dropped from the sky was absolutely convinced that he was indispensable to him, Stavrogin, and was in insolent haste to tell him so. He was being treated unceremoniously all round. But it was possible, too, that the tramp had not been altogether lying, and had tried to force his services upon him on his own initiative, without Fyodor Stepanovich's knowledge, and that would be more curious still. 2. The house which Nikolai Syavolodovich had reached stood alone in a deserted lane between fences, beyond which market gardens stretched, at the very end of the town. It was a very solitary little wooden house, which was only just built and not yet weather-boarded. In one of the little windows the shutters were not yet closed, and there was a candle standing on the window ledge, evidently as a signal to the late guest who was expected that night. 30 paces away Stavrogin made out on the doorstep the figure of a tall man, evidently the master of the house, who had come out to stare impatiently up the road. He heard his voice, too, impatient and, as it were, timid. "Is that you? You?" "Yes," responded Nikolai Syavolodovich, but not till he had mounted the steps and was folding up his umbrella. "At last, sir. Captain Lebyadkin, for it was he, ran fussily to and fro. "Let me take your umbrella, please. It's very wet, I'll open it on the floor here, in the corner. Please walk in. Please walk in." The door was open from the passage into a room that was lighted by 2 candles. "If it had not been for your promise that you would certainly come, I should have given up expecting you." "1:15, said Nikolai Syabolodovich, looking at his watch, as he went into the room. "And in this rain, and such an interesting distance. I've no clock, and there are nothing but market gardens round me, so that you fall behind the times. Not that I murmur exactly, for I dare not, but only because I've been devoured with impatience all the week, to have things settled at last." "How so?" "To hear my fate, Nikolai Syabolodovich. Please sit down." He bowed, pointing to a seat by the table, before the sofa. Nikolai Syabolodovich looked round. The room was tiny and low-pitched. The furniture consisted only of the most essential articles, plain wooden chairs and a sofa, also newly made without covering or cushions. There were 2 tables of linewood, one by the sofa, and the other in the corner was covered with a tablecloth, laid with things over which a clean table napkin had been thrown. And, indeed, the whole room was obviously kept extremely clean. Captain Lebyadkin had not been drunk for 8 days. His face looked bloated and yellow. His eyes looked uneasy, inquisitive, and obviously bewildered. It was only too evident that he did not know what tone he could adopt, and what line it would be most advantageous for him to take. Here, he indicated his surroundings. "I live like Zosima. Sobriety, solitude, and poverty, the vow of the knights of old." "You imagine that the knights of old took such vows?" "Perhaps I'm mistaken. Alas! I have no culture. I've ruined all. Believe me, Nikolai Syabolodovich, here first I have recovered from shameful propensities, not a glass nor a drop. I have a home, and for 6 days past I have experienced a conscience at ease. Even the walls smell of resin and remind me of nature. And what have I been? What was I?